Hey y'all, Rick Rex coming at you with another video on DCUO. Now before we get started, of course, if you like what you see, hit that like and subscribe button to help the channel grow and to catch every single update as they come out. Now this time, as promised, an update for all you water lovers out there. So since I'm running up a water tune for our character creation series, I wanted to optimize the loadout. So I took the time to work through the iconic tree, the movement mode tree, and all the way through the water powers themselves. Now I can't make it blow munitions out of the water, no pun intended, but I did come up with a loadout that hits hard and will keep you in the mix for the top of the board. Now I looked at 3 loadouts for you guys: melee, ranged, and single target. As I mentioned earlier, I tried to look at the loadouts from all angles to deliver the absolute best that it could be. As I go through each, I'll showcase what the optimal damage output setup will be, along with any outliers that happen based off of your movement modes. So let's start with our melee loadout and let's check out what that one's going to look like. For melee, I found one pure way to make it work and go above and beyond what your ranged damage would do. It's a pretty specific mix of iconic and movement mode powers, and here's my simple disclaimer on water melee. Do not attempt it if you are not super speed. Period. The end. It doesn't work in any way better than the optimal range loadout and will provide no benefit otherwise. That means no reward for the risk, and I'm just simply not going to cover any of the other movement modes because of it. So let's cover those white mods right quick. Your weapon socket doesn't really impact damage at all since your powers line up with the loadouts, so that selection is not really crucial since we won't use our weapon at all. Now I prefer to have replenishing adapters, so if I run out of power, it's a little easier to get back. And for your head, let's go on ahead and go with Supercharged Whirlpool, and I'll cover those supers in just a second as to why we went with what we did. Now, our neck is always going to be Escalating Might unless you're Prec, but for this loadout, we're doing a Might, so let's go on ahead and go with Escalating Might for this one. Now your back socket doesn't affect you in any way, as there's no applicable cooldown that's going to run with our loadout, so this selection doesn't matter at all. It's your choice. Now your chest is always going to be Penetrating Strikes no matter what, because we crossed the threshold a few years ago when ignoring that 2% defense really trumped gaining that extra damage that would come from core strength. Those NPCs are pretty healthy nowadays. And leg sockets are really not going to matter either way, as none of those powers are applicable to our build. And hands will always be max damage for that extra boost. And your feet can always be a variety of things, but with all the environmental obstacles that are in today's content, I really opt for Tumbling Master because remember, a dead DPS does no DPS. Now for artifacts. We had some discussion earlier in my last video about artifacts and what the best setup is, and maybe this, maybe that. But a big rule of thumb is the more you hit, the more you crit. And that's really the best way to think about your trans-strat combo. So this build does hit a lot more often than your normal loadout would due to one of the powers. And our optimal setup is going to be trans-strat and quiz. Now we're using quiz since we don't need a PI applicator to make this loadout work, so yay extra damage. And touching base on those supercharges, so I did some tests with Whirlpool versus Call of the Deep, and really Whirlpool is doing about half, almost exactly, of what Call of the Deep does, which is really nice because it's a 50%er. So that means that you get more opportunities for that power to crit, and you're not just out of luck if Call of the Deep happens to not hit the way that you want it to. Plus, you get to throw it that one extra time, and with an EOG spammer in any type of a raid, you can almost throw that thing off cooldown, which is super important. Up next is allies. So as you can see, we're using House of Legends bot, Batman Who Laughs, and Emperor Aquaman. Now, our reasoning behind that's pretty simple. House of Legends for damage, well, no explanation needed here. He's pretty much the king of single target damage and a great option when it comes to mauling a crowd. Now our next is Batman Who Laughs. We're going to want to take the luck of the draw here, as there's no better support ability out there right now for any role, including DPS. And we love to see that might buff that comes off of him occasionally. Now our next support is going to be Emperor Aquaman, and since we're using a robot sidekick, we'll use Hear My Call to give him a buff. This is really the only other option currently that'll buff damage innately, meaning we don't have to do anything to get it. And upcoming, we do have Batman, who does give us a buff, and he'll be worth the transition once he makes his way to live, but for now, let's go with Emperor Aquaman. So let's look at the spec that we need to have this one work well. Now, we only need one move from our weapon while we are melee DPSing, and that's a lunge. It's given to us at the beginning of the game, so no points are necessary here. And under super speed, we want to take all of our innates that you possibly can, and also remember that movement point because that's super important. But the mark here is really 396 skill points. If you have that much, then you can maximize the build, and if you have more, I'll show you where to put them in just a second. But our other powers needed under super speed are going to be Vortex Trap and Whirling Dervish. Under Iconics, we need to take only Sonic Cry and Robot Sidekick to make it work well. And in our stat points, we want to go super powered, fill out crit attack chance and damage, and then mind and power. Any remaining skill points left will need to go into health for survivability while you're in the middle of action, because remember, while meleeing, you're going to take a hit and you're going to have to be able to live through it. Now on to the loadout, which is the most important part of the build. The only build that will make melee worth the risk with water is going to be Shark Frenzy, Sonic Cry, Whirling Dervish, and Vortex Trap. And you need to have in Robot Sidekick and Whirlpool on the end to round it out. Now our loadout works as 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 4, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 4, and just rinse and repeat. So let's check out the damage here. Okay, so we got some good damage in and some parses for us to look at. Looks like we really do have a low as soon as we start out at 145, 674, and it looks like it peaks all the way at 190, 934, with our average median being somewhere in that 170 range, which is pretty good for melee DPS. Now let's just go on ahead and take a quick second and check out exactly what it's going to look like if we drop everything and see what those big hits look like. So this is always the fun part. Look at that gigantic number. 1,417,214 damage per second, chased by another set of big numbers. But that's what happens when you drop everything. So relish that, know that it's there, and that is your melee DPS loadout. Guys, if you like what you see, hit that like and subscribe button to help the channel grow, and most importantly, to catch every update as they come out. Our next one that we're going to put together is our water range loadout. So stay tuned for that one, and I'll look forward to seeing y'all then.